white settlers first came to this country. They were told by the native Aboriginals at the time of this ape-like man creature that was living side by side them in the bush. At the time, the white thought that this was just a ploy to scare them off because they're having conflicts at the time. But it wasn't too long before they found this story was more than true. From those times in the 1770s, right up until today, people are still reporting exactly the same creature. This is Springbrook in southeast Queensland, Yowie country. People often ask me, what is a Yowie? Well, it's a very good question. No one really knows until we find a body. At this stage within our group, we're probably not concerned with bringing in a body. I guess our main goal is to get some reasonable footage that can't be disputed. Easier said than done. But what is a Yowie? Well, I guess if you look back through anthropology and archaeology, we can come up with fossils that we can only hypothesise have something to do with the creature still seen today. Australia is interesting because as we first settled in this country in the 1770s, as the white settlers boated their way in around the coast, from coast to coast, they all reported seeing this same creature. They said he was big and hairy and looks kind of like a gorilla, yet like a man, very similar to the American Bigfoot. Over the years, I've interviewed countless witnesses from all over the country. And I know one thing is for sure. These people are no liars. They didn't misinterpret what they saw. They're seeing the exact same creature as what was being reported 300 years ago. Me, myself, and the group, we've had our own experiences with this creature beyond most people's wildest imaginations. This is Springbrook, one of the biggest Yowie sighting areas in Australia. We've had our own encounters right where I speak right now, and I can't help but be a little apprehensive about sitting here by myself. Springbrook has a long and detailed history with the Yowie, like many other areas such as Taree, Blue Mountains, and down to Gosford to the Great Dividing Range. The Yowie sightings, of course, escalated through the 18th century here in Australia up until the end of the 19th century, 2000. We have more reports of the Yowie than ever before. Now this can be for several different reasons. As our civilization grew through the wilderness and built roads further into the woods of remote Australia, we had more sightings than ever. By the year 2000, the sightings were 3, 4, 5-fold on what they were before. Now we don't know whether the population of the Yowie is expanding. We have reason to believe so, but of course we can't prove that. But we do believe. Yet the skeptic would like to believe that we know it all in our short 200-300 years habitation of white men in this country. We don't know it all. New species of animal is being discovered almost on a weekly basis. Insects, plant life, fish and so forth, sea creatures, being discovered every week, if not every day. Creatures that were once deemed extinct are still being found alive and well, living in certain habitats. So we don't know it all, and I think it would be arrogant for anyone to presume we do. People often ask me, how did I get myself into this? Well, it all stemmed back in '95 when I had my first encounter, and then a very aggressive encounter in June, July of '97. I'm probably the only person I know who's had an encounter with one of the big ones and actually lived to tell the tale. There's been many reported bush deaths in this country, and this is something that really fascinates me, is we have 2 bush deaths in December of '98 in the Blue Mountains. That involved the police walking around with large bags picking up body parts. I spoke to one of the investigators personally, off the record. It's a police sergeant from the Blue Mountains. He told me off the record, yeah, the boys down the station believe it was probably Yowie related. Yeah, they're here, they exist. I can even show you where they live. He said, but, he said, we as police have been informed by higher authorities not to cause public hysteria about the Yowie. Sure, they exist, but we're not allowed to talk about it. Back in the late 70s, we had 4 Canadian tourists go to a town on the east coast of Australia, New South Wales, called Bateman's Bay. These guys thought it would be fun to go out and look for the Yowie, because Bateman's Bay is, again, another prolific Yowie sighting area for many years. So they employed the services of a local tour guide who did horseback adventure rides. They set off in a southwesterly position from Mogo, which is just below Bateman's Bay. They were 2 days into the horseback ride. They rode down through this valley. Well, suddenly the horses became spooked, started rearing up. One horse reared so severely that it actually rolled backwards and landed on one of the tourists, crushing his leg. This guy was in pretty bad shape. They couldn't ride him out of there, so the tour guide said, well, I know the area best. I'm better off going and getting air support, and we'll airlift this guy out in the morning. So he took off. The 3 remaining friends were very spooked. They had a bad feeling. Something just wasn't right. They'd noticed on the ride in there that all these trees along the entire route were all snapped at about 4 feet. They found tracks and other strange things that really shouldn't be there. They were so spooked that they put this guy's leg in a splint. They set up a tent. They gave him food and water and other provisions. They put him in a sleeping bag and said, there you go, mate. You'll be right for the night. We'll go and chase this tour guide and make sure he does a good job. Make sure he comes back for you. We'll make sure of it. They also left him a 30.06 caliber rifle with 5 rounds. When they came back the next morning in the helicopter, the tour guide tells us it's the biggest bloodbath he's ever seen in his life. There's literally pools of this guy's blood across the ground through the trees, and the guy's right arm was ripped completely clean out of its socket. They phoned the police, who came and cordoned off the area. They examined the rifle. All 5 rounds were spent. And I know myself through my experience, and our team's experience, he would have spent the first 4 shots shooting at shadows. Would have been kinder to save the last one for himself. That's just another one. But the other interesting aspect of this is the federal police involvement yet again. This happens time and time over. We get countless stories. They actually took the body off to the Campbell Street Federal Building. They took the 3 remaining Canadian tourists away for an interview. They took them to Mascot Airport in Sydney, revoked their visas, passports. They were then made to sign disclaimers, confidentiality clauses, claiming that it was merely a hunting accident, and they were extradited back to Canada, never to set foot in this country again. The tour guide was then targeted, much the same. He wasn't extradited, but they gave him enough of a scare of what will happen to him if he speaks about it, that to this day he's very reluctant. From the witnesses that we've interviewed and the people in the know that were there at the time, we think this is a very real story. We had 2 policemen drawing their guns at one of these creatures in a town called Engadine, which is just south of Sydney. And interestingly, one of these policemen became involved in the Bateman's Bay incident. And as a result of that, certain federal members were actually taken aside and told in no uncertain words that if they continue this investigation any further, there's going to be trouble for them and their families. In 1994, in Evans Head, northern New South Wales, an older couple found what they thought was a bear face down in a stream. The old fella rolled him over with a stick, and they were both horrified at the face of this creature. They made the fatal mistake, as everyone does. Who do you call? You call the police. They call an unknown party from Sydney who came up, took the body away, and not a word was said since. Taree, again, Central Coast, New South Wales. A farmer was ploughing, and he dug up a whole field of bones, the biggest bones he's ever seen in his life, he says. The skulls were ginormous. The arms and legs were huge. What does he do? He calls the police. Big mistake. You just can't do that. They come in, call an unknown party again from Sydney, cordon off the whole area, trucks roll in, even their own farm. The farmer wasn't even allowed on his own property. They loaded all the bones onto the trucks and took them away. Not another word was said since. And only last week, another one came in where a council worker, who was a barge operator in Taree during the 60s, claims that he was in charge of driving a boat out to this little island that had cages full of mutants. That's what he's officially told. They were called mutants, little hairy men. And he had to feed these creatures with fruit and various other foods. And a boat came in from Sydney, put these cages below deck. Not another word was said. The story goes on and on. 1965, Kempsey, another one that comes to mind. Kempsey again is northern New South Wales. This one was widely reported in the papers, where an old fellow was camping out in this little hut, and one of our little 4-foot hairy friends came walking in there and grappled him, and there was a big wrestle, I guess you could say, going on. And as a result, this thing stood up and walked out, never came back. And he claims that to be true as well. I mean, there's so many stories. Charters Towers, Queensland, 2 incidents in 2 weeks with a 4-footer. One of them smashing a car window. The other one, the police found a guy walking down from the same area, head in a spin and blood down his pants. And he had a run-in with these things too. And many years later, I contacted another witness who, at the time, I had no idea, knew of these. He knew of them well. Not only that, he had his own experience there. So these creatures are quite aggressive. I find that the smaller ones seem to be more aggressive. I think there's a reason for that. I think that people who have an aggressive encounter with the larger ones, generally don't live to tell the tale. And in my own instance, it was one of the larger ones, but I was very fortunate to get out of there. In the same week, another guy wasn't. He was on Australia's Most Wanted. He disappeared in the same stretch of bushland in the same week that I almost got attacked. To this day, they still haven't found his body. 2 weeks after my incident in Ormo, southeast Queensland, a group of young boys came to me, not knowing of my experience, my encounter. I just happened to be out there at the bush, in the bush at the time, and they said to me, "Do you ever see anything strange out here?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And they told me a story of how this thing came charging through the bush at them while they were building their bush hut just on dusk. And they said they only just made it out with their lives. As they're running away, they could hear their bush hut being destroyed, being pulled apart bit by bit. They reluctantly had to come back the next morning to pick up their pieces and their belongings. And they found D-sized batteries bitten in half and their hut strewn right across the bush. I saw the hut myself. It was a mess. And a couple of months later, the same creature was seen in the same area, crossing the Pacific Highway, 4 lanes of highway during peak hour, just on dusk. Made me feel better. I wasn't the only one to see him. But yes, the aggression factor is out there. It's very real. Certainly very real. We have a lot of reports, witness reports coming in of aggressive encounters and behaviours, people being chased in their cars, being chased on foot. I think half is just a spook factor, a spook tactic I should say. But all in all, it's something to be very wary of and something that we have to respect when we're out in the bush because our lives are on the line. Again, ask, well, what do I think a Yowie is? Personally, it's just a hypothesis, but I believe that the Yowie is a creature that science and paleontology has facts of the creature that once existed, yet, according to science, is extinct. The problem for science is that people are still seeing him, even today, in large numbers. Not just a one-off, not occasionally, all the time, every day. People are seeing these things out there in the bush. So, what does the future hold for the Yowie? Personally, again, I think a very sad one. It's just a matter of time before one of these things is found, killed, and that'll mean total destruction of the creature.